Next week, up to 1 million disabled Britons could find themselves on the sharp end of the British government's welfare reform scalpel. And the reported plans, spearheaded by Rachel Reeves, that's the lady with the odd CV, aims to cut billions from personal independence payments, that's the PIP, and incapacity benefits. This is all in the name of making the system more sustainable. Yet in a moment of grim irony, while the government claims it must slash bureaucrats in NHS England, it appears poised to unleash an army of new assessors tasked with scrutinising, reassessing and in many cases denying disability claims. Labour, once the self-proclaimed champion of social equity, now seems eager to assume the role of administrative enforcer, overseeing a mass cull of disability benefits under the guise of fiscal responsibility. This is not reform, this is a large-scale transfer of misery, with the government effectively investing millions in staff whose primary function will be to interrogate the vulnerable. And the last wave of reassessments for PIP led to multiple suicides, if you recall. The paperwork was incomprehensible, and it wasn't about filling out the truth, it was about filling out what the bureaucrats considered to be an acceptable answer. And knowing what that acceptable answer was required inside information, in effect. It required help. And the majority of people who were filling out those forms were perplexed. It was a vicious, nasty cycle of bureaucratic bullying. It's impossible to believe that this coming wave of PIP reassessment will be casualty-free. Starmer's Labour government has expressed a desire to streamline and rationalise public services. Fine, particularly within NHS England, but rather than cutting through red tape, it's merely redistributing it. Those whose jobs are lost in one arm of government may well find themselves redeployed to another, transforming from public servants into gatekeepers of austerity. It's a bureaucratic Ouroboros, the snake that's got its tail in its mouth. It's an endless cycle where job losses in one domain necessitate job growth in another, each position justified by the need to monitor, reassess, reduce support for the most vulnerable. The computer says no. It's a madness. This process is not merely inefficient, but deeply cynical. It's difficult to escape the conclusion that this entire mechanism is designed not to ensure fairness, but to reduce the number of successful claims. PIP applications are already a bureaucratic ordeal whose claimants are required to navigate labyrinthine paperwork, endure exhaustive assessments, and in many cases endure rejection before finally securing an appeal victory. Now, the bar for eligibility is being raised even further, with new rules dictating that only the most severely disabled will qualify. The sharpest edge of these reforms will be felt by those with mental health conditions. The government appears intent on tightening assessment criteria in such a way that many individuals suffering from anxiety, depression, or neurodevelopmental disorders will find themselves excluded. The rationale? An apparent belief that the rise in PIP claims since the pandemic is driven by milder conditions. This ignores the well-documented surge in mental health crises, the backlog in NHS psychiatric care, and the reality that a mild mental health condition on paper is debilitating in practice. The message is clear. Those who struggle with washing, dressing, or even feeding themselves because of mental health conditions will find their difficulties considered insufficiently severe. And the changes to eligibility criteria will ensure that needing help to engage socially doesn't qualify, while requiring a hearing aid or assistance with washing one's lower body will fall below the new threshold. Rachel Reeves has insisted that the welfare system is broken and must be reformed. The justification is that spending on disability benefits has risen sharply since the pandemic, ballooning to £70 billion and outpacing both the Home Office and prison budgets combined. Well, the Home Office, as far as I can see, is wasting a lot of money keeping immigrants in limbo while they're not actually processing the applications, paying for paying for hotel accommodation while they're not actually processing the applications, paying for people to be indolent when they could, in fact, be working and contributing to the tax system. It's madness, isn't it? Similarly, the prison budgets. Of course, the prison budgets are skyrocketing because people are being kept in prisons because their legs aren't the right shape to fit a home release pendant or a ring or whatever it's called, bracelet. Within Labour ranks, dissent is, of course, simmering. Senior figures such as Angela Rayner, Ed Miliband, Lucy Powell have raised concerns, with some reportedly considering resignations. This is, after all, a party that campaigned on the promise of treating mental health with the same urgency as physical health. To now make mental health conditions less eligible for support is an extraordinary betrayal of that commitment. The government insists that these changes are driven by principle rather than fiscal panic. Well, we have yet to see that evidence. The numbers tell a remarkably different story, don't they, already? And the welfare reform aims to claw back an estimated £5 billion, a figure remarkably close to the sum Labour needs to plug gaps in its spending pledges. Disability charities and welfare experts have warned of the devastating consequences of these cuts. Scope has described them as a direct route to plunging thousands into poverty, and the last time similar restrictions were imposed, they led to a surge in appeals, many of which overturned initial rejections. But the damage inflicted in the meantime was irreversible. The Department for Work and Pensions has been repeatedly linked to cases of suicide following benefit cuts, yet the government appears content to press ahead, repeating history in the name of fiscal prudence. We must ask, what is the true cost of these reforms? Not in terms of the billions saved, but in terms of the lives disrupted, the mental health crises exacerbated, and the fundamental erosion of a welfare state designed to protect, not punish, its citizens. If Labour's mission is to make the state work better for the people, then dismantling support for the disabled while expanding the machinery of bureaucracy is an odd way to achieve it. These proposals are not a sign of fiscal responsibility, but of political cowardice, an attempt to balance the books by targeting those least able to fight back. As history has shown, the ultimate cost will be measured not in pounds and pence, but in human suffering.